Yes, we're on this discussion about the clouds.
Oh, yes.
This is our Sukkot
Okay.
preparation because, again, according to there is a difference of opinion, Gemara, as to whether the purpose of, in other words, the sukkah, when it says "Ki basukos hoshavti es bnei Yisrael," that I had the Jewish people dwell in Sukkot, is it literally Sukkot? In other words, is that when it says that Hashem had us dwelling in Sukkot, is it talking about the tent-like structures that we lived in while we were moving through? That's what we're supposed to be thinking about. Or is it referencing the Anane HaKavod, the clouds of glory? And halachically, we favor the opinion that it's talking about the clouds of glory. So these clouds, which we're talking about here, starting in chapter 9 of Bamidbar, verse 15, these clouds are what we're supposed to be enveloped in when we are sitting in the sukkah. So there's something about Sukkot and these clouds that are very tied together. Sukkot has two primary, you could say three primary mitzvot. Mitzvah number one, be happy. V'samachta b'chagecha, be happy. Mitzvah number two are the four species, which we practice the whole week of Sukkot, and at least once a day. And then the other primary mitzvah is the sukkah, sitting in the sukkah, dwelling in the sukkah. So it just so happens we get an opportunity to prepare for the sukkah's experience by trying to get some sense of these clouds. So last week, at the end of our discussion, I was drawn to this question of, does God have a body? And so the Rambam, let's just read it. We've done this before together in another class. But
does God have what? What did you say?
Does God have a body?
A body. Body. Okay.
That's for shalom.
What?
Chas for shalom, David said.
All right. So the Rambam talks about this in different places, but the first place he talks about it is in his commentary to the Mishnah. So in the 10th chapter of the Tractate of Sanhedrin, it starts off, all of Israel have a portion in the world to come, as it says, and your people are all righteous. they will inherit Aretz, the land forever, the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, for my name to be glorified. And these are the exceptions, the people who have no share in the world to come. So these might be people that have lived, as far as mitzvah observance, according to the Mishnah, they may have actually lived what we would consider impeccable mitzvah lives. So when you looked at their actual practice of mitzvot, their mitzvot seem to be without fault, at least externally. But then it goes on to say, one who says there's no resurrection of the dead, derived from the Torah, and then it gives a whole list of other things that would, even again, for a person whose actions are correct, but their heart is in the wrong place, we'll say their heart is in the wrong place. So it's on this Mishnah that the Rambam first presents his 13 principles of faith. This is what he calls his third principle. So the first principle is the existence of God. And by God, he means like the first cause, the one who brought all creation into existence. The second principle is the first one is God's existence. The second one is the unity of God. And the third one, denial of his physicality. And that is that we believe that this unity that we mentioned is not a body, not the power of a body, and the actions of the body do not relate to him, not in his essence and not in his doings. And hence the sages, may their memory be blessed, denied the possibility of his composition and dissolution, and said, above there is no sitting or standing, no backside and no weariness, which is to say, no dissolution. And that is oref, and no composition, that is apuri, as per usage. And they, afu, on the shoulder of the Philistines, which is to say, they pushed themselves onto their shoulder to connect to them. And the prophet said, and to whom do you compare me? And I will be equated, says the Holy. But were he a body, he would be comparable to other bodies. And everything that comes in the Holy Scripture that describes him in physical ways, such as walking or standing or sitting or speaking or similar to it, is all by way of metaphor. And so did the rabbis say. The Torah speaks in the language of people. The sages already spoke much about this matter. And this third principle is indicated by that which it stated in Deuteronomy 4:15, for you did not see any image, which is to say, you did not perceive him as something with an image, because he is, as we mentioned, not a body and not the power of a body. So that's the Rambam's third principle. And he quotes that thing, which was the verse that we had trouble with. It says, you did not see any image, which is to say, you did not perceive him as something with an image. Now, he wrote this commentary in Arabic. It's translated into Hebrew, and he saw the Hebrew translation. So he knows, he did see it, so I think, so the word is, Lo ra'item kol tmuna, lo hisagtem oto ba'al tmuna. So the Hebrew is, you did not understand him, you did not relate to him as one who has an image. That's how the Rambam understands it. Lo hisagtem, lahasig means to like understand or arrive at a notion that he was somebody who had an image. And our problem with it is when we looked at the various texts that talk about, let's say, the Ten Commandments. Look at that. Was that always there?
What?
The Aryeh Kaplan?
Yeah.
But remember last week we were looking for the Aryeh Kaplan?
Yeah,
How is it there?
and I didn't even notice
We
because
kept on looking.
it's the front, it's, okay,
This just happens.
yeah.
Either
well,
way,
you know what?
I-
It wasn't here last week.
That's what we're saying. We're saying it wasn't
was
here.
not here.
It wasn't here.
Nope.
It leaves and
Somebody
it comes.
borrowed it and brought it back.
There's a lot of books in this. This happens with a lot of the books here.
Exactly.
They go somewhere.
No, you know what? It
When
wasn't
I'm looking
there.
for them, I cannot find them. I'm not supposed to find them. They're hiding.
That's right.
And then they reemerge. So last week I was looking for this because he's the one who likes to spend time on these things. And now it's reemerged.
Mhm.
It wasn't there.
It wasn't there.
But yeah, so last time this was our problem. It looked like when in the descriptions of the giving of the Torah, that there is, for instance, we hear God speaking out of a fire.
Right.
So what's the fire? Why do you say the fire is not an image? He's speaking out of the fire. Or let's say out of the cloud.
It's not
It
his.
says
image. It wouldn't be his
Okay,
image.
so-
It's what do you call it when you have like a thing that you want to represent you, but it's not you.
An avatar.
Thank you, like an avatar.
Right. So I want to be careful about that word. We borrow that word in Western culture.
Yes.
The Hindu have very specific meaning when they talk about it. And they may mean what the Rambam is saying we don't believe. So just to be careful with that, I'm just going to say it this one time. That if we do use the word avatar, because it's useful, we don't mean it in the sense that the Hindu people mean avatar.
Right.
I don't think. Because they may think that a deity can overtake a body and can present itself in a body. They may believe that, like the Christians believe about Jesus.
Yeah.
So we for sure don't believe that.
Right.
In fact, it seems to me, even though it's not always overtly discussed, and we've talked about this before with David and Lois and I, that the Rambam's insistence over here that God is not corporeal is very much because the Christians have suggested that he became corporeal, and
Yeah,
therefore
well.
it needs to be rejected very strongly.
Absolutely.
So we don't mean that for sure. In any of this discussion, we don't mean that. But still, again, we have to, even as David was expressing the concern about even using the words "does God have a body," even suggesting it makes you nervous because right. So, but what can you do? The text seems to be challenging us in this regard. So those Hebrew words of the Rambam, in the Rambam, it sounds like what he's saying from the Hebrew, not so much from the English translation of the Arabic, from the Hebrew translation of the Arabic. It sounds like, again, the words were lo hisagtem oto bal tmuna, which means that you have, it seems to be that this is also talking about intellectual perception, not just sensory perception. You have sensory perception. And now you're coming to a conclusion. Your mind is trying to make sense of what your senses are showing you. So how do I put this together? So my senses, what I'm seeing on the screen of my perception from my senses, from what I'm seeing is there is fire, there is smoke. Out of the fire and the smoke, I'm hearing. So I'm seeing and I'm hearing. There's fire and smoke, and out of the fire and smoke, I'm hearing a voice, which I understand to be God's voice. There's no question in my mind. This is God's voice. Even to say that God has a voice is already giving a physical something to God, right? So these are concessions. The Rambam is saying these are metaphor. They're all metaphor. But it sounds like this metaphor is playing out in the sensory perceptions of the people.
Well, if God wants to communicate to the people, he has to do it in a way that they can hear it and understand it.
Right.
So,
but that process, think about that process. So let's say you're talking about whatever this means. We're just using words, trying to get as close as we can to an idea that might be bigger than words, but we're using the words. So let's say the best of our ability, God begins, as far as we're concerned, the communication begins in a place that's beyond comprehension. It starts in a place that we don't sense. We wouldn't sense it. Where it begins, we would not sense it. Somehow it's moving into a place where we can sense it. It moved from a place where we cannot sense it. We don't have access using our senses. It is being brought into a place where we can now access it using our senses. What are we accessing? In other words, what are our senses? What is the information that we are receiving, right? There's something that suggests itself to be fire. There's something that suggests itself to be smoke. There's something that suggests itself to be cloud. There's something that suggests itself to be a voice. We recognize it as voice. And we also recognize that somehow this is God. Now, how can this be? Because God is not physical, right? This is our problem. This is our problem. The Rambam recognizes this as a problem too. Everybody, this is a problem because God is not physical, and God is not he's essence. He's not
Right.
physical, but somehow he communicates with us. How did he communicate with us? So you'd have to say you have one of two basic options. Option A is that this is a vision. In other words,
Or
this
a
is
dream.
a dream. That, in other words, it's prophecy. It's not just a regular dream. It's prophecy, it's some form of communication with God. This sort of it's sort of a shortcut to get around the physical problem, because what you could say is that in truth, there's no fire, there's no smoke, there's no clouds, there's no voice. In other words, if you had an observer who was not part of the communication, if you have an observer, he would be just looking at the mountain and he would see nothing. He would look at the people, he would see nothing. He would see the people, but he wouldn't see any interaction between anything and the people. He would just see the people and he would see the mountain. Everything that is being described is happening internally. In other words, God is, as it were, playing the minds of the people like an instrument. And so images are appearing inside the mind of a person. They don't exist outside the mind. They are only in the mind of the people. The images are emerging inside the minds of the people, all the people that are there. An observer sees nothing.
Right.
That's option A.
That's how the book moves. Okay.
We don't know. We're just letting the book does whatever it does, just like the other books. I can't tell you how many times Rabbi Jonathan Sachs got up, just disappeared and reemerged. We don't have explanations for it. I don't know.
That's
This morning
it.
I was
don't
looking.
have a real
This
explanation.
morning I was looking
it.
for a different Aryeh Kaplan book, and can't find it now. And I'm just waiting.
See, somebody came and switched them.
I don't even think it requires that. They just disappear on their own.
Exactly.
This is some kind of magical library. All right, so that's option A. Option A is the prophecy option. Everything that's being described here, all the events, the clouds, the fire, the voice, all of that is only experienced internally. All the people are having the same experience. They're going to wake up out of it, out of the vision. And they're going to say, did you see that? And the other person's going to go, yes. Did you feel that? Yes. Everybody's going to agree about what happened. But what happened was only on the outside. It wasn't on the inside. This helps with it doesn't entirely help, but it gets rid of a lot of the sort of messiness of this question of God's corporeality, because what's happening is that it's just all happening inside the corporeal person, but experienced, deeply as communication by God, and everybody has the same experience. And everything, and they would describe it exactly how it's described in the Torah. They would say, yeah, this person would say, did you see fire? Yes. Did you hear God's voice coming from the fire? Yeah. Were you sure that was God? Yes. Was there a cloud? Was there smoke? Was there this? Was there sound of a shofar? All that kind of stuff. Yes, 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 yes. Where was it? How tall was it? What this? Everybody's going to agree. Let's just assume that's what would happen. So that's your prophetic option. Option number 2, that an observer would have seen everything that happened. Everything that happened. And even though an observer would have seen and heard everything that happened, even though they are personally not in a state of prophecy, they would have seen everything that happened, because this is like God moving through creation. In other words, creation itself, and all the physical laws, they are moving in a sort of similar to the way we were describing before, but now it's actual physical things that are happening, but also it's sort of God's design. So everything is moving and happening. It's not actually God's voice, because God doesn't have a voice. It's not actually, God is not the fire. God's not the fire. And God's not really technically any more in the fire than he's in anything else. But it's not represent it. It's just that this is the way he chooses to do it. Like you were saying, he has to somehow communicate with us, so he communicates with us. But
in a way we'll understand.
Right, but he's using the physical world to do it. Right.
He's using the physical world, but he's not physical.
Right. Now, and that might be, you could say that's what the Rambam means when the Rambam says we understood that he's not about Tmuna. In other words, in the experience, we get it, that he's just using another thing in order to speak to us.
Right.
In other words, it's not him. That's what those words might mean. That you, in other words, there was a kind of intellectual conclusion that we all had, that even though we're hearing a voice, which is God's, and it's communicating to us, we realize he doesn't really have a voice. And even though we're seeing this fire and all these other kinds of things, we realize that's not God.
Right.
But to say you didn't see anything, what is it? What would it mean to say you didn't see anything? That's what you have to meet. That's what the Rambam is possibly explaining. Again, this is carefully reading. This is a very close reading of a Hebrew translation of his Arabic. Kolomar, that is to say, whenever he says kolomar, this is not literal. In other words, literal, it's lo ra'item kol tmuna, you didn't see any image. That's literal. Kolomar, that is to say, he's telling us something that's not literal. But this is the meaning of those words. Kolomar. Lo hisagtem oto ba'al tmuna. You did not understand him to be the owner of an image. In other words, you recognized, yes, there was fire, there was a sound, there was all these other kinds of things going on, but that we understood that's not really him. In other words, it's him. In other words, we're getting a message from him, but this is not, just like somebody might say when I'm listening to a recording. If I'm listening to a recording, let's say, like they have, I've only seen these on television shows, but you'll have somebody who recorded a message for his family to be viewed posthumously. Okay? And so they're all gathered, and now they're seeing a video that he's prepared for them to see posthumously. So even though they have no doubt that about the veracity of this communication, they don't think anybody else faked it or whatever. They know that this, but it could, and they will say to you, they, in a certain way, they experienced him saying something to them, but they know wasn't what they saw, wasn't him.
Right.
It was just an image projected
It
with
could have been
equipment.
anything. He could have made a waterfall and done the same thing.
Right. That's not really him.
Right.
What I interacted with is not him. It's electrons and all sorts of physical equipment that is, in a certain sense, presenting him to me. But it's not him. That wasn't him. Now, it's not exactly the same, because he was a physical being who did something physical, but we're, in a certain way, you could say that. In other words, this is something, a communication that we have because this is the kind of tricky thing, because we experience it as a direct communication from God. We have to also this has to be infallible communication from God. It's infallible. All the things that he talks about, that the Rambam talks about, that are the problems of the physical world, subject to decay. It's imperfect for all different reasons. Can't be said about that communication.
Right.
You can't say that communication was imperfect. You can't say that communication missed anything. Everything is in that communication perfectly. There's like a perfect communication. And yet somehow I have to say that, it in a sense, it came out of nothing, because he isn't
planted it in your brain.
So that's option A. Option B is that the physical world was used in this experience, and therefore I would say an observer watching it, this observer watching it would say that in option A, he would say nothing happened. He didn't see anything. In option B, he's seeing everything happening, right? So, but you would still have to say, even though all that stuff's happening, it's understood somehow that none of this is God. He is
Rabbi?
not. Yeah.
Just, I don't mean to interrupt it if you have more, but it
No, I
seems,
don't.
it seems in the Jewish religion, the first option seems more tenable. Now, people who equate nature and God, maybe reconstruction, I don't know, would have no problem with the second one.
Right, but they'd have problem with God at the Torah.
Right. So that's why the first option seems more Jewish or more Orthodox or more, like
Right.
consciousness. It's consciousness
Right.
versus the physical, right?
Right.
So, okay,
Right.
just.
And especially when you talk about prophecy, because you don't have prophecy in a awoken state. This is one of the distinctions. This is his principle. It's one of his later principles about the difference between the prophecy of Moshe and the prophecy of everybody else. Here, the sixth principle is prophecy. Prophecy does, and that is that a person should know that among the human species, there is found those that naturally have a highly elevated character traits and great wholeness, and their souls become fit until they receive the form of the intellect. Afterwards, that human intellect clings to the active intellect, and it emanates lofty emanations to him. These are the prophets, and this is prophecy, and this is its understanding. The full elucidation of this principle is very lengthy. It's not our intention to demonstrate all of its paradigms and to elucidate the nature of its attainment, as this is the understanding of wisdom more generally. Rather, I am mentioning it only in passing, and the verses of the Torah testify prophecy and prophets. But then he says, the seventh principle, the prophecy of Moshe, our teacher, peace be upon him, and that is that we believe that he was the father of all prophets that were before him and that arose after him, meaning that all are below him in loftiness, and that he is the chosen one from the entire human species. This is so since he grasped more of the knowledge than any man who lived, and more than any man who will live, by the way. Any man who will live, that means more than Mashiach. Just pointing out whenever people are trying to imagine Mashiach. And he arrived at an elevation above man until he reached the level of angels and was included in the domain of the angels. No barrier remained that he did not pierce and go through, and no physical impediment impeded him, and no defect, whether large or small, was a part of him. The illusory and physical powers and their perceptions disappeared from him, and the power of arousal and desire were separated from him, and he remained only intellect. And about this matter, it is stated about him that he would speak with God, may he be blessed, without an angelic intermediary. My desire was to elucidate this amazing matter and to open the lock from the verses of the Torah and to explain the meaning of mouth to mouth and the entire verse. This is going to be at the end of our Torah portion of Baha'u'llah. At the end of this Torah portion, we're going to get to where God is explaining to Miriam and Aaron why Moshe is different than them. They're not the same. And I saw that these matters would require very many proofs, and would have needed many propositions and introductions and parables, and that we first elucidate the existence of angels and the difference on their level from the Creator, God may be blessed, and that we elucidate the nature of the soul and all its powers. And the circle would be so wide to the point that we would speak about the forms of the prophets, speak about and are fitting for the Creator and for angels, and we would enter into a world with a full posture in its context. And 100 pages would not suffice just for this matter, and even it would be greatly shortened. Therefore, I will leave it for its place, whether in the book of homilies that I have projected to write, or a book of prophecy that I'm involved with, or a book that I will write to elucidate other principles. And I will return to the understanding of the seventh principle, and I will say that the prophecy of Moshe, our teacher, be it upon him, is distinct from the prophecy of other prophets in 4 ways. The first one is that any prophet that existed was only spoken to by God, may be blessed, through an intermediary, and Moshe was without any intermediary, as it states, mouth to mouth will I speak to him. The second is that any other prophet would not get prophecy except when he was sleeping, as it is stated in many places, in a dream of night, in an apparition at night, and many like this, or during the day after falling into a trance, in which, in such a way that all of his feelings disappear from him and his faculty of thought becomes fully available, like in a matter of a dream. This matter is called an apparition or a vision. About it is stated, the vision of God. And the divine speech would come to Moshe during the day, and he would be standing between the 2 cherubs of God, may be blessed, testified, and I will meet you there. And God may be blessed, said, if you will have prophecies, etc. Not so my servant Moshe, mouth to mouth I will speak to him. All right, so the second one is, even though he doesn't say it totally explicitly here, but he's saying he is not asleep, he is awake. Right, so now, all other prophets are in, that's why I'm saying if an observer watched this, an observer would not be seeing anything. They're like asleep, and they're having this vision. They're not, or in a trance, and they're having this vision, and it's all happening inside of their heads, as opposed to Moshe, who in some manner or form is having it while he's awake. He is awake. So the thing is, you'd have to say then that the people, when they're experiencing Sinai, are not experiencing it as wakened beings. They're experiencing it as in a trance or asleep. And the question is, does all this language work with that? That it is the simpler explanation. It's not simple. It's a simpler explanation to say that there was something like that. You could also say that for this one time, the people are granted Moshe's depth of vision. That this is some kind of exception, and that regularly that's true, that you can't. But for this one time, the people are all granted Moshe's kind of. Because also one of his things is they always get it through an intermediary. Here it says God speaks to them directly. At least the first 2. That's how the Midrash understands it. The first 2, God is speaking directly to the people, whereas the Rambam is saying that one of the distinctions between the prophecy of other people and Moshe is that everybody else has an intermediary, some kind of a glass they see through, or what he's calling an angel.
But if they experienced it the same way, they wouldn't have wanted to pass out. They wouldn't have, right? Exactly the same way.
Right, but
Maybe,
it could that is what's making them want to pass out or die.
well,
That they
okay.
can't handle what Moshe regularly
Can handle.
handle or something like that. I don't know. But that thing about direct, for instance, what are you going to do about the direct? He said that they don't have it directly, and
Moshe does.
And it seems like, and it also seems like the people do, at least the first 2. It seems like the people are hearing it directly from God. Anyway, so that the reason that matters is because one of the contexts for which God is speaking to the people is out of the cloud. That was when Moshe goes back in, it says they hear God speaking to Moshe out of the cloud. Remember we had that. But also, it said, and this was our troubling verses. This was in Exodus, in Mishpatim, chapter 24, verse 15, and it said, as soon as Moshe reached the mountaintop, the cloud covered the mountain. God's glory rested on Mount Sinai, and it was covered by the cloud for 6 days. On the seventh day, he called to Moshe from the midst of the cloud. And then it says, to the Israelites, the appearance of God's glory on the mountaintop was like a devouring flame. Moshe went into the cloud and climbed to the mountaintop. Moshe was to remain on the mountaintop for 40 days and 40 nights. And also, we had the previous statement, which was, and this was the one where Lois, last time where Lois was really saying, doesn't it? Says they saw a vision of the God of Israel, and under his feet was something like a sapphire brick, like the essence of a clear blue sky.
Yeah, that was in
That was Aaron,
in 24:9.
verse 9.
Moshe, Aaron, Nadab.
Right.
Yeah.
So you the Rambam would say that's all in prophecy. That's all in prophecy. But still, to say the words, you didn't see an image, is not strictly true. They did see images. You'd have to explain. Yeah, you'd have to say, well, they weren't real images. You saw them in prophecy. Or you'd have to say, like what the Rambam is saying, they understood in the experience that he has no real image. And that's why the Rambam seems to have to add that. And again, I'm assuming that those words are carefully written, even though they are the Hebrew translation of Arabic, that's what it means. It means that you understood in the experience that this is not him. And when it says you didn't see an image, it doesn't literally mean you didn't see an image, because you did see something. But that that's not him. That's not him. The problem is, there's all these, amongst Hindu scholars, amongst Christians, amongst whatever, that they could they could subtly do this with the language. They could say, no, it's an avatar. It's an avatar. It's not really him. He's embodying a body. But we know that that's not really, that he's not a body. He's not a person, right? I don't know if they do say that, though. Maybe they don't. Maybe they insist, no, he's both a person and with a real life or whatever. I don't know. But if they didn't, if they do that, then it seems like you could fulfill the language and just say, yeah, God could embody somebody, but that's not really God. That's not really his essence, or something. Could he do that? Right? But it seems like we cannot say, it doesn't seem like we can accept that notion. But then how do you distinguish between that and these other things?
It's the capacity that he has to make us hear him.
Right. But like, let's say there was a person walking around and somebody would say that person is God incarnate. So that we would say that we don't accept that possibility. The question is why? If you're willing to accept the idea that there is, if you're willing to accept the idea that in these other ways, there's an image, but it's not really God, then why can't you say the same thing about this? Obviously, there must be some subtle philosophical argument. There must be some.
Are we saying that even though we believe he didn't incarnate, are we saying that God doesn't have the ability? Doesn't actually have the ability to incarnate if he wanted to?
I think he has the ability.
Well, I don't know. The Rambam.
The ability is to make us aware of what he wants, but he's not actual. I mean, it's
right.
No, but the Rambam, it doesn't seem like the Rambam accepts that possibility. The Rambam would say, that's not God. If you see it, that's not God. It's
Oh, I
not,
see.
it's not
I
part of the
see.
definition of God. If whatever you saw, if you saw that thing, that wouldn't be God. Because
So
that's
when
not what we
cloud-
mean by God,
Okay,
right? So I don't know if this is just a problem of language. I think it's partly a problem of language.
I think so.
I'm not sure about it. All right, so how do we get to all this? Because of the clouds.
Right,
We call them clouds of glory, and the you see there's a kind of even almost like a sleight of hand. I'm going to call it a sleight of hand when it in that verse 15 when it said as soon as Moses reached the mountain, the cloud covered the mountain. God's glory rested on Mount Sinai, and it was covered by the cloud for 6 days. So in Hebrew, in verse 15, it's Vayal Moshe lahar vayichas ha'an anan es ha'ar, the cloud covered the mountain. V'yishkon kvod Hashem al har Sinai, and the glory or the kavod, the gravitas or the weightiness of God dwelt on Mount Sinai. Vayichasehu ha'anan sheshet yamim, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. So is the cloud the glory of God?
And
Is the cloud
was
not?
covering.
Right. So here, like a careful, close reading of the verse, they're sort of kept a little bit separate, but it's done. I'm calling it almost like sleight of hand because it's done quickly enough that it feels like you're saying that is the Shekhinah, that the cloud is the Shekhinah. Where they vayishkon, because that term vayishkon, Shekhinah means God. It's a way of talking about an aspect of God's presence, almost like and it used the word vayishkon. That's the word Shekhinah. Vayishkon means to dwell. So when you experience when you experience God's presence, if you feel like you experience God's presence, like you're somewhere, and it just feels like
Yes.
a palpable sense of the divine.
Yep.
Let's say you feel like there's a palpable sense of the divine. So somebody might sometimes call it like I felt God's Shekhinah, because there's like a, but here you see like it's like there's a careful attempt to like just to make sure that in language we've kept them separate, even though you're like putting them together one after another. It's almost like you're pulling one away quickly and putting the other one there to give the image like that this is somehow that somehow this cloud is the divine presence. But again, if the cloud is God's Shekhinah, then God is physical, because the cloud seems physical. So that's why
How is God physical?
because if you're saying that he's the cloud, then
Okay, I
that
get
would
it.
make him
I get
right. So we're not saying that, but it's like you're getting close to almost like close saying that. And then we had the earliest language of this was back in Beshalach when it was talking about the pillar of cloud that went out
it. So is
before the
God is
people.
not a physical figure then?
Correct. He's not physical. But the problem is there are times when we get really close to saying something that sounds like he's physical. And one of the places is when it talks about the cloud of glory going before. I just want to see the first time he talks about it because I want to see. Yeah, so it says in verse 21, so this is right at the beginning of the Shalach. This is chapter 13, verse 21 in Exodus. God went before them by day with a pillar of cloud to guide them along the way, and by night it appeared as a pillar of fire, providing them with light. So,
Go and it's not, right. Got it.
right, so
Which is giving him form.
right, so again, here the language you have to be very careful with the language. It's God like walks before them by day. It's a holech lifneim. It's like walks before them by day. Be'amud, in a cloud. In a cloud. right? So it's like, it's not that he is the cloud, but he's like in the cloud, sort of, so to speak.
Sort of.
So, right, so if he doesn't actually, I'm saying he's gonna let me down here. At some point, he definitely talks about this cloud, but
Yes,
doesn't talk about it here, which is the first time
Oh,
it's
wait.
mentioned.
read it last week.
No, I couldn't find him. I couldn't find R.A. Kaplan. He's the one I'm
Oh,
looking
well.
for here. Right. So,
Rabbi, could a cloud and fire be an angel? In other words,
yes, definitely. It could. It
it could
could.
take
That would
Oh.
make an agent of God.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's like if it, like, there is a term, like one of the terms for angels is seraphim, like
Right.
saraf.
Seraphim.
Like soref means to
Seraph.
burn, like
Seraph.
something that burns. So
That's the description.
right. So and there's descriptions of like a chariot, and like there's like a hierarchy of these angelic beings, and they're somehow there, these seraphim. Now a seraph doesn't have to mean fire. It could mean something that burns. It could even be like a snake, an asp or a snake or something like that.
No, I don't
Something
follow.
that stings. Right. So and,
We're in Exodus.
all right, so now, so that was there, and then, yeah, so as we go on, I just wanna, let's see here, now that we have access to him, I'm gonna go to our place, maybe he talks about what's our chapter and verse again? In our place, where we are.
We are in,
We're,
we just started chapter 10.
signs. So it doesn't, I'm missing where he talked about the cloud. There's some place where he's gonna talk about the, we're gonna find it. I'm gonna find where he talks about it, because I remember that he said something somewhere where Aryeh Kaplan was the one who said that the cloud was an aura. It was an aura. It was like an aura of light.
Okay, 9:15. On the day the tabernacle was set up, the cloud covered the tabernacle. Were
Right,
you
so
there?
there, yeah, so I have that, but he has no comment, and it just says, it is possible that the cloud was there also at night, because it doesn't say anything about night or day. So he just has that one comment about it, but he doesn't go into the nature of the cloud. So somewhere I saw him talk about this.
Oh, yeah, the next line is,
It says, on that day, the tabernacle was, the cloud covered the tabernacle, the tent of testimony. Then in the evening, there was something that appeared to be like fire on the tabernacle and remained there until morning. From then on, it remained that way. There was a cloud covering it by day. Oh, no, it says right there.
in 20, in
Yeah, so,
line 20,
so in
sometimes
six-
the cloud would be upon the tip for a number of days. And sometimes the cloud would remain from evening until morning. So,
oh,
was
so
when
that
they
was the
don't
problem.
travel.
Oh, so it said cloud instead of fire.
right.
Right. Okay, but anyways, it seems to be, also this cloud seems to be what is called a pillar in Bereshit is this. This seems to form over the tabernacle as in what we would recognize as a cloud as opposed to a pillar. And then but then we have these, especially when we talk about it with regard to the sukkah, we have this notion of being enveloped, protected on all sides by this cloud as we go through. So it would be like if you were spying on the Jewish people from a distance, you would just see this cloud. You wouldn't see the people because we were completely surrounded by cloud. But again, somewhere R.E.A. Kaplan had said this, of blessed memory, that he had suggested that the cloud would be more like an aura. Again, how real is this cloud? What, in other words, is this cloud?
Is it a cloud or a fake cloud?
Right. Is this
How could a
more
cloud
an
be? How could
experience?
a cloud be a fake cloud?
In other words, could it be an experience? Like sometimes people will say, like they'll encounter somebody and they'll say, "Did you see that? His face glowed. Did you notice his face glowed?
Yeah.
It was like a light." Like some people will say that. Now, if you took a picture of him,
Yeah.
I don't think that the picture, or video is necessarily going to show what this person's experiencing, but they experienced it as a kind of glow. And sometimes you'll see in Renaissance paintings of saints or something, they'll have like a halo.
Yeah.
Like there's some kind of light. This is to represent a sense that when you're around like a saintly person, you experience them. They like shine. There's like some kind of light around them. And there are people in the world of in a kind of new age world of what is that body of experience that ESP is included in? Whatever it's called. But anyways, there are these people that talk about seeing auras.
Oh, I know.
You know the guy who wrote Jurassic Park, the author who wrote he wrote Jurassic Park, Andromeda Strain, all those books.
Yes.
So he wrote a appendix. There's an appendix to a book. He wrote an autobiography, and there was an appendix to the autobiography, which was a paper that he wrote that he sent to the Skeptic Society, arguing that science money should be spent on exploring these extra perception kind of experiences. One of the ones he writes himself about going on with a group of people that taught you how to see auras, and also how to have out of body experiences and things like that. He went with groups, that did that kind of thing, and he claimed that these warrant scientific exploration. But one of the things they did was to see auras. They could show you how to see auras. You see that this kind of light around people.
Yeah, people with extrasensory perception.
Right. Well, they claim to be able to teach anybody how to do it. So, anyways, in somewhere, R.E.A. Kaplan suggests that this might what is called a cloud here may have been something more like an aura, and it would be an indication of God's divine protection around us. That somehow there's something divine surrounding us, and that was the experience of it. Again, that I don't remember where he said that, but yeah. So
Who is R.E.A. Kaplan?
he was a great scholar who lived in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and a little bit. He died in his 40s. And he was extremely prolific, and a lot of the books in English about Kabbalistic and mystical ideas that we had maybe 30, 40 years ago were written by him. And one of his great talents was translating mystical language for a contemporary audience. He is the one who, this is his translation of the Torah, but he did a lot of, especially when it came to more mystical writings. And so, all right. I once asked Moshe Shapiro about something R.E.A. Kaplan said. And Moshe Shapiro said, "Who's R.E.A. Kaplan?" Didn't go right. All right. Yeah. Okay. I say we should do this again.